Welcome to the Modern Classrooms Project podcast. Each week, we bring you discussions with educators on how they use blended, self-paced, and mastery-based learning to better serve their students. We believe teachers learn best from each other, so this is our way of lifting up the voices of leaders and innovators in our community. This is the Modern Classrooms Project podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 202 of the Modern Classrooms Project podcast. My name is Toni Rose, Deanna, and they, them pronouns, a designated hype person here at MCP, and I'm joined by Sean Aker, a career educator and educational leader focused on system alignment, learning, and human-centered practices that create big changes. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, it's so exciting to be in this space with you. And thank you so much for saying yes to the podcast. I know that you and I had connected in person, real life, while we were in COSA Multilinguals conference. And so we just connected really easily, right? It was just such a genuine connection. And listeners, I am training for a half marathon. And I think I've said that before. And Sean has actually helped me out with some of the running questions that I have. His pace is phenomenal, by the way. So if y'all have any running questions, I am volunteering Sean Aker as tribute to answer all running questions.
Sure. A lot of practice.
And it's very impressive too. So I aspire to be like you when I grow up. So
you will be. You have a long ways to go. You know, I'm older than I look, perhaps. So you'll get there. You'll get there before I got there.
Fingers crossed. We'll see. Okay. So before we get started, Sean, what is bringing you joy currently?
Gosh, I've taken a lot of time off the last couple of weeks, the end of the years here. And so I had some time that I needed to burn. And so I was able to take a couple of days and head down to San Diego with my wife for a couple of days and visit friends. It's awesome. This morning I took my daughters fishing and, just a local reservoir, and we didn't catch anything and we still had a good time. And then we're going to go to another pond this afternoon. That's on the other side of the freeway and try our luck with some smaller fish. And, and then my son, he's got this full-time job working as a counselor, and he's learning a lot, but he worked 3 summers as a custodian at the school starting after his 8th grade year. And so he really wanted to do something different, and he's learning a lot about students and children, ages kindergarten through, I think it's 4th grade. So, his eyes are getting open, and they just went camping, and he made this video of biscuits and s'mores, and he put it together like this little mashup to music. And he's just so talented, and everybody's just thinking oh my gosh, man, this kid is just, he's got this interest and talent for creating these videos, and it's just so cool to watch. So anyway, I just spending time with the family, just learning from them and being with them.
Oh, I love that so much. That definitely brought me joy listening to you talk about it. And what kind of fishing? Because I just realized that there are different types of fishing, because I'm not a fisher. I don't know much about fishing. But was it just regular schmegular fishing?
Yeah, I guess. I'm not an expert. When I was younger, I did a lot of salmon and steelhead fishing. And then, just what's easy with little kids is really lake fishing or pond fishing. So, you use a bobber, or you use weights with bait that floats. And so the weights go down. And, if you want the fish to be, 16 inch. I don't even know what I'm talking about. I just read about it, and then I'm just let's try that. And we catch 2 or 3 fish a summer. I mean, one summer we caught a bunch of little ones, and you just throw them back. But I think altogether we've caught a couple of trout or something. And anyway, I'm not that great. I'll talk about running. That's where I feel like I've got a little bit more expertise. Fishing is just fun. You put something on, throw it out. Hopefully you just spend time with family.
I love that. I know I used to go fishing when we were younger, and I just remember absolutely hating it because I was not a patient kid, nor am I a patient adult. So fishing for me was not therapeutic. So I always am so impressed when people are oh yeah, I've gone fishing, and I was there for the whole morning or the afternoon, and it was just so great. And that just could not be me. So, but thank you for entertaining my questions about fishing. And so, okay, Sean, tell us more a little about who you are and how you started your MCP journey.
Gosh. Okay. Yeah. So, let's see. I started my education career. I will say back all the way in high school. I was recruited to start working at a local elementary school supporting reading instruction. So really what that meant was I would just read with kids. They would either read to me or I would read to them. And I was a junior at the time. And then my senior year, I worked in the preschool that we had at our high school. And I did that for both semesters. And that was a lot of fun. And then after I graduated from high school, went to college, and I actually ended up coaching baseball in the summers back at my high school for a couple of years in a row. So, working with older kids, just specifically coaching. And then kind of throughout that, I kept coaching off and on throughout college. And then when I graduated, as I was graduating, I got a job as an instructional assistant for English language learners or multilingual learners. At the time, I was an ELL assistant. That was my official title. And I did that for a little over a year and a half, which was fine. But I was making more money working at a bar than I was doing that. And being young, I went with the money. And so I kept working at the bar until I got married. And then right away we got pregnant and I needed to go back to school. And so I went back to school, got my master's, and I taught math, health, computers for 3 years. Became the principal at that school, same school, middle school. And I was principal there for 4 years. And during that time, I also taught at least one class because we just had a very small staff. So I taught a health class, and then got a job at a high school. I was a high school principal for a few years. And then I got a regional position, working to reduce chronic absenteeism as a statewide initiative. And so I was one of initially 6, and then it became 7. So there's 7 of us across the state that were working on this statewide initiative. And that was awesome. And then I moved into my current role. And that was about now 5 years ago. And I'm a coordinator of a program through another state initiative. It's actually a law, House Bill 3427. It's the Student Success Act. And so it's funded through the corporate activity tax. And there's mixed feelings about the corporate activity tax in Oregon. It taxes the big businesses, which is great. They can afford it, but it also taxes the small businesses. And so some folks, they really want to see a return on the investment. And so that's really important to me, is like really being transparent with what we're doing with these funds. And so we kind of built the program with that in mind. And so as part of this program that I oversee, so getting to your question, we serve all 21 of our school districts, and they also have access to the corporate activity tax or the Student Success Act funds. Actually, half of that money, so it's $1.2 billion a year was the initial push. It's more than that now because the tax has actually been very lucrative for the state. And so districts get 50% of that money. There's 190 school districts in Oregon, and then there's some charter schools that are eligible for, and some other programs that are eligible for funds. But they get that money directly. In order to get that money, they have to write a plan. It's not competitive. It's that district's or that program's dollars, but they have to write a plan that attends to 2 high-level goals of the Student Success Act, which is essentially increasing academic outcomes for historically underserved and addressing mental health and behavior needs of students. Those are the 2 big goals. And so the key performance indicators that every district in the state has to address is 5th-year completer, 4-year graduation rate, regular attendance, 9th grade on track, and 3rd grade reading. And so there's a lot of intersection in there. And so this is kind of long, but it's really good context for getting to how does MCP fit into this, or where does my journey begin there? So each district, they have to do community engagement, their students, their staff, their families, community partners, really leaning into identifying who is not at the table or who has not informed their decisions, and really seeking input from those groups who maybe are typically underserved or who have not been elevated, whose perspectives have not been elevated. And then they create a plan that's supposed to drive those 5 metrics and hit, increasing outcomes for historically underserved and the mental health and behavior needs. You've got 21 districts. They all have a different local context. And some of our districts are large enough that you've got multiple fiefdoms, right? You've got these little pockets across the district that, what they want it's not exactly what the whole picture of the district might look like. And so trying to break that apart and meet the needs of 21 districts and having a comprehensive plan that meets the needs of 21 districts has been a challenge. And so we have our own community groups and educators that continually engage in the services and programs that we provide. And there's clear things that have come up where we can find some intersection. So obviously mental health and behavior. We've got one of our strategies focuses on providing services and training to increase educator capacity to support mental health and behavior. Social emotional learning ties real close into that, but we keep it slightly separately because it's just such a broad scope when you talk about social emotional learning. And then instruction and distance learning was the original because it was kind of pandemic time, and we've modified that a little bit. We've made an adjustment there to call it teaching, learning, and assessment. And so that's really focused on instructional practices. And then the 2 other main pieces are, this is going to sound weird because it's not that big of a deal, but it's a huge deal, but equity. And really that's like a through line for all of our programs. We're constantly applying an equity lens in our decision-making, or trying to do our best and continuing to improve in applying an equity lens in our decision-making and resource distribution and allocation. And then just program capacity, like what does our program have? What do the people that work on our team, what do they need so that they can do their best to serve this broad array of needs? So you got these 5 strategies, and underneath each one of these strategies is a list of programs, right? So you can guess Modern Classrooms Project falls under teaching and learning and instruction, right? So one of the hats I wear is obviously program coordinator. I have to work with my team and identify who's going to kind of navigate these programs, and what will, let's say, a partner like Modern Classrooms Project, what's their role in supporting our network, and what's our role in supporting our network with Modern Classrooms Project. I mean, and hats off to Modern Classrooms Project, the way that it is lined out. For me, it's been it's not a heavy lift for me to engage with Michael Hakarainen has been, our lead. It was Christine Barford's before that. And then Avery, I've spent a lot of time on calls with Avery as well. And so it's just really easy because you all have the data and you all have the capacity for the mentorship, which is so greatly needed. And you've got the program outline. So what do? I talk it up to our constituents, and I present some of that data, that return on investment. And I say, this is what's happening for those folks who are engaging in it. And so my journey started about 3 years. And this is like, I wish I could see a timer on this because I know this is a really long answer. So thank you everyone for being patient as I get through this. But my role was listen and learn about Modern Classrooms Project, identify who is engaging, how they're engaging, identify different needs and how this might fit into those needs, and plug it accordingly. So plug it broadly, maybe make some direct contacts and say, hey, here's an opportunity. And so direct contacts could be at a superintendent level, director of teaching and learning, a building principal, or even directly to teachers and some of those folks I know. And so then just really understanding the program, the approach, the outcomes, how it intersects with what is already happening, and making it really tangible. And then we got a really awesome donation from a private source funder who was able to open up a $500 stipend for folks who completed the full training. And so I hope that clarifies my role. Do you have any questions on what I just said? Did I make that connection there?
No, yeah, no, that was beautifully done, Sean, actually. Like I knew you were cool, but now I know that you're really cool.
That was very kind of you to say.
Yeah, you have like so many different experiences, right? And I just love how you started just being in high school all the way up to where you are now. And just to kind of give that background information of like how you make the moves that you do, right? Keeping in mind the equity lens, keeping in mind all of the past experiences that you've had, and really just trying to be intentional with how you move in spaces. And I think like I kind of gathered that when I first met you. So like I really like appreciate that. So thank you for sharing your story, because I don't think I've ever heard that. That was my first time hearing it. So yeah, no, thank you. Like I just knew that you'd always advocated for our program. And I knew that you could talk it up and you knew exactly like the benefits of it. And so for me, I was just like, oh, like Sean really got into researching modern classroom and how it could impact, you know, the state, honestly, and like just people that you work with. And so understanding your experience just really made it more like, it just made it more clear for me to be like, oh, okay, like this all makes sense now. So thank you again for sharing that. It was beautifully done, like I said. And so I know that you're also like an avid listener of the podcast, which is so exciting. And so you're, you know, like you and I text every now and then, and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is a great idea. And like, I really appreciated this about the podcast episode. I love that. For me, as someone who's hosting this and creating and planning this, like I love those kind of conversations about the things that we're creating for you all, right? So I really appreciate that. And I know that you had mentioned about, something about appreciative inquiry. And those were two words, like a phrase that I've never heard of. And I'm intrigued. And so for our listeners, AKA also me, who don't know what that is, share with us that definition. What is appreciative inquiry? I feel like I could kind of figure it out, but I'd love to hear from your perspective.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. And really, and I don't know if we can, you know, if this gets thrown back in there, but I probably need to give a little bit more credit where credit is due. So our director of school improvement services, Gretchen Bruner, she was the one who was in conversation initially with Modern Classrooms and Christine Barfords and a couple of our other folks. Like we have a Mark Siegel I can't remember his title, but he's at a private school in our region, and he is really big on proficiency-based learning and mastery learning. And so he was a big advocate as well. And so with that partnership with that donor that I mentioned, and Gretchen was plugged in, Gretchen initialized it. And then I eventually just kind of took the reins as her role shifted and mine did. So I just want to make sure I clear that. So, but appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiry is, I actually looked up some definitions. So I'm like, how, you know, I'm not always into like textbook definition of things. So I think from my perspective, when I think about appreciative inquiry, I think about how to avoid telling people what to do. Really empowering others to own what they are doing, what they have done. That's the most important thing, right? It doesn't, and especially as a leader, when I tell people what to do, now I'm responsible. I'm more responsible. I hold more responsibility than another person because I'm saying this is what you have to do. And that it doesn't feel good to be on the receiving end of that. It doesn't feel good because now it's like micromanaging. And nobody, like, I think most effective leaders I know, they don't like to micromanage. And I think the most successful people I know that have either worked with me or that I've supervised, they really want to understand what impact they're having, and they don't always get the questions they need to reflect and have that self-awareness. So appreciative inquiry, it empowers people through questions that are open-ended, that cause reflection, and that increase self-awareness so that a person can really understand the true impact they're having, because our intent often is different than our impact. And so appreciative inquiry just it's a way to navigate a relationship. And there's been times when it's like, I've turned some pretty tough relationships into very solid relationships by being inquisitive. And I think the appreciative part, which I really need to mention is number one, people are really putting in a lot of time and effort. In most cases, they're really trying hard. So like, I can always appreciate somebody, man, you are working so hard at this. Like Toni Rose, you are working hard at this. I was paying attention to you paying attention to me just a minute ago and thinking like, Toni Rose is really listening. And then you reflected and I'm like, I never said those things to Toni. And she just like, did a really good job of reflecting back. Right. So I appreciate how much you listened in that scenario. That had a really good impact on me just in this short conversation. Now you scale that and you do that with multiple people. And, I'm still honing my skills. A lot of Elena Aguilar and Bright Mornings. I listen to that podcast too. She's the bomb. If people aren't a friend of the podcast, they probably need to become a friend of that podcast as well. But she's got some really specific practices and ways of there's some more I'll say in the podcast as we go on. She talks a lot about ways of being and ways of doing. And so we'll talk about that a little bit, but so that's my definition, I suppose.
I love that so much. It took every ounce of my body not to interrupt you to celebrate all the things that you were talking about. So kudos to me, actually. I'm celebrating the fact I did not interrupt you.
2 thumbs up.
2 thumbs up, right? And so a couple of things, right? When you said you're not really that, all about the textbook definition, I just kind of chuckled in my head because as a non-native speaker, I hate textbook definitions because they never make sense. Like if I were to look something up because I didn't know a word and then the definition didn't make any sense at all. So I was like, okay, this is completely useless. I hate it. So I just kind of chuckled when you said, let me phrase this in a way that people will understand. And I know that like, here we are sharing appreciations, right? Like I really appreciated that for my brain to just kind of be validated the fact that like I also don't like textbook definitions because if anything, they just create more barriers than help. Yeah.
Even like saying like the way that I'm hearing you say that makes me think like, oh my gosh, I interpreted the definition. I interpreted the way that I enact appreciative inquiry, the way I've seen it, the way I've experienced it 2 ways. But only from my perspective, right? Like if you ask some of my colleagues, they might say, yeah, that's how he does it, but they might have a different explanation for it, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, sorry. Thanks for letting me chime in there.
No. That was actually really great too, because again, just as a reminder that like people have different perspectives, right? And that's okay. Like we are going to love and nurture and care and accept the way that people are and still continue to have that inquisitive mindset, right? Like you're saying, like approaching relationships and conversations with curiosity and empathy so that we can continue having these challenging conversations or even just like deepen the connections that we already have with each other, right? And I also like really love this whole thing of like not telling people what to do. Like, when I tell you I hate it when people tell me what to do, I make sure to not do exactly what you told me not to do, right? Like, or do like, I just hate it. I'm like, how are you? Like, I too know I'm coming in with my experiences. I'm coming in with my knowledge. And it just creates this, like, it creates a wall for me, right? Of like, this is how you got to do it. And this is, like, these are the things that you have to do. And it's like, hold on, wait a minute. I don't have to do anything. And so just like naming the fact that like, maybe we can continue nurturing those relationships before we start like throwing ideas or like mandating things, right? Because I know that this is something that often, when I was in the classroom, we were always mandated to do things and I absolutely hated it. So completely agree with the whole thing.
And it's like, I mean, now you're just making me reflect even more. It's like sometimes we are told what to do, but in terms of like objectively meet the goal, right? Like we have a goal to meet. But when it gets really challenging from both ends is when we're told how to do it, which I heard you mention. Nobody wants to be told how to do it. That's really where that micromanaging comes in. That's where that disrepair in a relationship. I mean, you can really break a relationship that way by saying like, hey, do it this way. And I mean, it's hard for some folks who have had a lot of success when they've done things a certain way to not say, this is how I want you to do it versus providing an example. Say, if you need some examples of successful ways that something's been done, I can provide some, you let me know. Right now, it's just like the offer is there. I've offered it to you, but I'm still empowering you to do whatever it is that you need. This is the goal. This is what we're working for. But I know that you can do it. That's the reason that's the reason I'm working with you. I've asked you, or we've had this conversation because I know you can do it. right? You let me know if you need some help. I might be able to provide other examples. And even that's not a guarantee.
Yeah. And I'm even thinking too, like this trickles down to how we as educators navigate our relationships with our students, right? Like if school leaders are like mandating things, you have to do it this way, you have to do it right now, you have to do it in, whatever way and with no understanding, right? Like the teachers just have no idea why we're doing this thing. It doesn't make any sense. There's no conversation. It's just being mandated. That kind of trickles down into the classrooms too, right? Like of teachers being like, you just have to do this. This is mandated. You got to do it because I said so. And so it's just like, it's just like a trickle down thing. And
so much.
And I mean, we could honestly talk about this thing the whole entire time. We have so many things to talk about though. So let's just put a pin on that because I'm sure we'll come back to it. I do love the concept of like making it to where like empowering people to be more aware of like the way they're showing up, right? Being more self-aware, being reflective. Like these are life skills that I think we often really struggle with. And I really like, again, the whole trusting that individual or the human beings or the team of just being like, you know what, y'all got this, do it however, like you think is going to be the best way to do it for the people that you serve. Okay, so we'll get back to that. And I love Elena Aguilar. As everyone knows, Bright Morning is my jam.
Yeah.
All day, every day.
Hey there, listeners. This is Zach. Just want to remind you of some exciting updates for the podcast moving forward. We are now publishing this podcast on YouTube, so you can listen there as well. We also have a TikTok account. It's at Modern Class Proj, P-R-O-J, like all our other social media, where we answer questions, share resources, and also share research in bite-sized videos, TikTok stuff. So definitely check those out. I will have links for those in the show notes for you, and definitely check out the YouTube. We have a whole playlist set up just for the podcast. We'll be sharing the full episodes as audio and also hopefully some shorts with video coming up, clips of the recordings for you all to check out as well. So check out those links in the show notes. And now let's get back into it with Toni Rose and Sean.
Okay, so you mentioned like getting excited about understanding systems, right? Through the appreciative inquiry that we just talked about. So can you explain how this approach can help bridge the gap between early learning, potentially really focusing on individual development, and system alignment, which seems a little bit more macro?
Yeah. It's such a great question because again, you have to understand the context. And I think ultimately, regardless of the situation, my opinion is we always have to be looking at an assets-based approach. What is already in place? What is already working? Who are we serving and who is achieving, right? Who is engaged in the decision-making? That's a great place to start because as we're looking at the assets, we might identify barriers or gaps in what we're actually trying to accomplish. I think part of I've seen a few different equity lenses, and I know it's part of the Oregon equity lens is, what are the assets or what are actually, I'm not sure if it's the exact Oregon equity lens, but I've seen it in equity lenses that, it talks about like what is working and who is it working for. And, so when we talk about, for me, my perspective, I'm thinking about early learning and I'm thinking about these intersections and you mentioned the macro level. Well, there's a big piece of macro data, which is attendance, right? We can identify a school's attendance rate or a grade level's attendance rate or even a class attendance rate. And those can be indicators, but when you've got an attendance rate, you're referencing there, you're referencing days. It's a math problem. It's what are the total number of days that could have been attended by all students altogether, and what are the total number of days that were attended? That's your numerator. And so then you have like, we've got a 94% attendance rate. And okay, well, that sounds good, pat on the back. But let's look at like how many regular attenders do we have attending 90% or more days? And how many chronic absentees do we have attending less than 90% of days or missing 10% or more? because now you might have a 94% attender rate. And I used to have a math problem that I could quickly describe on this, but I don't even want to go there because I'll probably mess it up. But you could have a 94% attendance rate, and you could still have a subset of chronic absentees that they're not attending regularly. So when you think like this macro level, you think, okay, so a school district might have like a 70% regular attender rate, which means 30% of all the students across the district are chronic absentees. Well, those are people. Everyone that makes up that 30%, so let's say it's 1,000 schools in the district, or 10,000 schools, 1,000 students in the district, or 10,000 students in the district. If 30% are chronic absentees, that's 300, or that's 3,000, right? Let's distribute those numbers across our schools, across our personnel. If we take it down to a building level, most elementary schools that I know are somewhere between like 300 and 400 elementary students. In general, I mean, that's a it's a very broad range, but so we got an elementary school of 400 students. If they've got 30% chronic absentees at 400 students, you got 120 kids. That's 120 kids across that. So how many kids of that 120, where are they? What grade levels are they in? What are some other common traits that we have behind some of these kids? Is it, is it gender? Is it racial identity, right? Is it other federal program, right? Like what do we know about these kids? So you take this macro information like attendance and you break it down to identify the kids, and then you start asking more questions like, who are these kids connected to? What do we know about their families, or do we have relationships with these families? And then there's a great program called the Parent Teacher Home Visit Project out of California. And our program is going to be partnering with them a little bit more specifically next year. But, their approach on Parent Teacher Home Visit Project is not sending someone to the home to tell the person about, or tell the family about all of the resources. Their approach is clear. Invite a parent to engage with you so that you can learn about them, their situation, their hopes and dreams for their kids. Like if we do that on those smaller levels where we have clear evidence through the data that students are being underserved, that needs are not being met, that there are needs that exist that we haven't identified yet. If we can do that on the micro level, then we can start bridging these gaps with some of the other performance data, like reading. I met a kid not too long ago, and now I feel very, very privileged to be where I'm at with my career, with my family, with my spouse, with my kids. My mom always took me to the library, but I was never really into it. I just went because she took me. But apparently that's what some moms do. But I never really thought anything of it. My wife started taking our kids to the library. Going to the library has just always been a thing. I was at a school the other day. We were short-staffed at one of our programs, and so I was filling in. And this kid was really into the books on the shelf. And he's asking me if I've read books, and I'm asking him if he's read books. And I said, no, but I bet you could get to the library. He's like, I've never been to the library. And this is a fifth grader. And like, I just completely took that for granted. But I mean, and this is a very small example. But if we don't know that kids haven't even been to a library, what else don't we know about some of these students we're serving? And how can we, not that we need to go solve all these problems and present solutions. We can't just go out with a solution focus, but if we can really go out and inquire about what they like to do, what brings them joy. The first question you ask, what brings you joy? What do you like to do? And how can we bridge these gaps? How can we make school more meaningful for each of those students? And it's not the administrator, and it's not the student success coach or the attendance advocate or the superintendent. It's whoever in the district is going to have the best, closest relationship, the most interactions with that kid. It could be an instructional assistant. It's more likely a teacher. And, then we got to find a way to support our staff in making these meaningful connections. So it's empowering. How do we empower from the top down, or how do we invite ideas from the bottom up, ways to build these relationships? And where do those meet? Because when we have strong relationships and we have a better desire to get into school, we've got, we will end up with better performance. And we've seen that in some of the schools that we've served, where they've made some strategic changes, opened up the doors for some better pathways for two-way authentic communication, more messaging going out, better messaging in where language needs, where there's gaps in meeting language needs. And, that means underserved. I think I was reading the language on the MCP, on the MCP language, and it was like, it's like underserved populations. I can't remember. I'd have to pull it up again, but it's like, where aren't we meeting the needs of our parents with, that are limited English proficient? Anyway. Okay. That was a big, huge tangent, but so that's kind of where those intersections meet for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I took lots of notes, of course. I think the biggest thing that popped up for me was just the focus on relationships, right? And something that also came up for me is that it's relationships and not assumptions, right? When you were thinking about like, what do we know about our caregivers, our families, our parents, right? Instead of saying like, what do we think we know? It's like, no, what do we know? So I think I also just want to always just say like, it's really quick for us to make assumptions. It's really quick for us for our biases to show up. And that's why relationships are so important, to really take a step back and actually get to know the person holistically as a human being. And I really love the reminder too, Sean, that like, we don't always have to go in there with a solution focused mindset, right? Like, I think as I continue to learn how to be an active listener, I am learning that I don't have to fix people's problems. I can just listen. So I don't have to have a solution every single time. I can just be a listener. I can be a sounding board. I can just be someone that they can, reflect with. And this is why I always say like a thought partner, right? And so I really love this whole thing. Just a reminder that like, we don't have to go in with solutions. We can just go in there and have a conversation. Because I think sometimes we don't do that. We always have some kind of purpose behind the conversation, besides like having a genuine connection. So I really like that reminder.
I was just going to add one more thing. I mean, I'm speaking about parents, but I'm thinking also like sphere of influence, right? I'm speaking with my administrator hat on.
Right.
And even in my program right now, I'm an administrator. I have folks that work on our team that serve educators directly, and those educators serve students and families, right? So I'm like 3 or 4 spheres removed from the students I'm serving, right?
Yeah.
And when I think about that, it's not about me. It's about me elevating the idea of relationships, but also I have to practice relationships with the people I'm serving directly.
Yes.
I need to know those folks. And that's been a big journey for me over the last couple of years, is really like understanding, like, I don't know these people like I should know them. They don't know me. And so building that type of relationship authentically so that they know who I am, and they see my hopes and dreams, not just like this vision because I'm in charge or something like that, and so that's been helpful. But that trickles down, just like what you said before. That trickles down. It's yes, I want them to have relationships with students and families, and I want to have relationships with students and families. But I also need to have a relationship with the people I support, because that's my direct influence, is those people I support.
Yes, yes, and yes. And this is why community is so important, right? Like to be able to lean in and lean on the community. And community could be all stakeholders, if that's what we want to call it. But like essentially, like who's all part of the learning process. And that's the community, right? Like really elevating and supporting community as much as we can. And I know I was thinking too, you were saying like, when we think about, we want to serve every single student, right? And like trying to figure out who can have those better connections with specific students or with families and caregivers, and really just thinking about, it doesn't have to be me, right? It doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be an AP. It doesn't have to be the SPED teacher. It doesn't have to be like any of that. And this is why I think time and time again, I always say like, there's a trusted adult. Ask your student who the trusted adult is, right? And then you'll figure out like who they actually like, who they respect, who they vibe with, who they love to go to, and just like be themselves. And so, yeah. And like you said, creating and providing that space and capacity for teachers to create these relationships as we need to, right? And so, okay, great. And so in your exploration of opportunities, what kind of system alignment are you most interested in achieving when it comes to something like modern classrooms? Is it alignment with specific goals, human values, or like something else entirely? I'm so curious to hear this.
To me, it's just about empowering people. I mean, it's just about empowering people. It's about empowering kids to really understand. My son, as a sophomore, I picked him up from school one day. I'm driving him home. This is like maybe a week into school. So he's gone through all the syllabus. They've talked about all the syllabi. They've talked about the grading systems and whatnot in all his classes. And he just says, "Dad, I think that students should be graded on how much they learn." That's what I think. Like, what do I know now, and what do I know at the end? That should be how I'm graded. And then we had a short conversation about that, but in the end, I'm like, I'm trying to encourage him. You should go talk to your assistant principal about that. Someone who he had a very strong relationship with. You need to go talk to that, because if one of your administrators hears a student say that, and you have influence over that person, and you've got other folks in your camp, other students in your camp, and there's some agreement around that conversation, that could be a catalyst for change, which I know your district is working on anyway. And it was really cool to hear him say that. It's been, now it's been 2 years since that, right? He's going to be a senior next year. And, I haven't seen that type of system change yet. Right. So that's a little disheartening to me. It takes a long time. Tom Guskey, are you familiar with Tom Guskey? He is all about proficiency grading, mastery grading, really, really empowering students. I can't remember if he did a show with John Hattie. John Hattie's Visible Learning. But, you talk about like, what are the influences on student outcomes, and like student agency is one of the biggest. I can't remember where it falls on the list. It's been a while since I really got dug into that. But when you talk about student agency, clarity on what it is I need to do to be successful, like he's talking about students, but I don't serve students directly. I serve people who serve students. Is it clear enough for them what it should look like? And do they have the autonomy to set that up collegially? I think, I can't remember where I put it in when I was like, reviewing the notes and stuff. So I'm just going to insert it here. I mentioned before about ways of being and ways of doing. So what do I hope? I hope that people can change their ways of being. And they can, which means I think understanding the impact they're actually having. And then, okay, that's not my desired impact. So I need to change the way I'm being, which might be my beliefs about students, my beliefs about grading, my beliefs about the approach to student learning, my beliefs about leaning into some of the research practices. And if I can change those beliefs and my way of being, now I can do things differently. And that's when, okay, my mindset is open to learning about what's actually happening. And now I'm going to do something different because of it. And ways of being and ways of doing, the first time I heard it, the The first time I heard it, I was just like, this sounds like nonsense. This is nonsense, right? But the person who was saying it, I totally trusted. And I was like, all right, if that person is saying this, and that other person is saying this, and I trust them and I know what they're saying, I need to find out what that actually means. Again, my perspective bringing into this conversation here, ways of being and doing for some is not tangible, because that's not a formal doctrine in our ed programs, in our ed prep programs of ways of being and ways of doing. You don't take a class on ways of being and ways of doing. You take a class on pedagogy, right? You take a class on instructional best practice. Practice, practice, practice. What does practice mean? Practice is what I do every day. Practice is what I do over and over and over again that gets me a result. If I'm serving somebody directly and I'm getting results that I don't want, I have to change my practice. It's imperative that I change my practice. Therefore, if I'm open to that, I am changing my way of being because I understand something about myself differently. Therefore, I'm changing what I'm doing. I'm changing my practice. If one person changes their practice and you're working with a group of, you're working with a classroom, and the way that I change my practice is resulting in a different way that my class does something. Now I'm changing my classroom procedure. So now I've got to change. I've learned something new. I've developed a new skill. I've got to change to my practice. I'm changing my practice. It's led to a different procedure. I'm working with my colleagues who are doing something very similar or trying to accomplish a similar goal. I'm a math teacher. I'm a social studies teacher. I'm an English teacher, whatever. I'm changing the ways that I'm being and doing. My practice is changing. My procedure is changing. Now I'm growing this, and with my colleagues, we're all changing our practice and we're all changing a procedure. We find out that this procedure that we've changed is so impactful. It is serving those that we thought we couldn't serve. It is serving those we used to blame for not being successful. Well, they aren't this, they aren't that. Well, they can't this, they can't that. No. We aren't doing something. We change what we're doing. Our procedure is different. And because that procedure works so well, now we actually start writing it down, and it's in our student handbook. It's in our staff handbook. It's in our district policy, right? We're doing things different. It's now a policy because we're seeing the impact on student outcomes. So as the student outcome is a result of changes to practice, procedure, and policy. And it happens all throughout. It's not like if we don't change policy, we don't get student outcomes. No, if we don't change practice, if we don't develop new procedures, if we're not open to changing policy, then we won't see the consistent outcomes that we want to see, the student outcomes. And so that, to me, is that ways of being. And that is, from a program like ours, I'm promoting Modern Classrooms Project because I know that this changes practice. I know that this leads to better procedures. I know that this leads to more student agency, which creates better student outcomes, right? And if we have enough teachers that start doing this, and this is like, hey, if you're going to teach math at this school, we teach math with the Modern Classrooms Project approach, or call it what you want, but the approach has been changed, and it's going to be written down within our math department. Now it is a policy within our math department that we do it like this because we've seen the impact on our historically underserved populations. We've seen the growth and achievement. That's like super long-winded, but I mean, like that, it's one person. It's one person, right? It's one person, and you get a lot of one peoples. And we got, I feel so blessed. We end up, 2,000 people engaged in our program just in this last year. I think it's around 2,000. That might be a slight exaggeration. Maybe it's like 1,800 or something like that. But somewhere around there, like unique educators engaged in the programs and services that we are offering through our program because we listened and learned and we're trying to meet their needs. And that's a lot. That could be a lot of impact if one educator is impacting 30 or 50 or 100 students.
Listeners can't see this, but I'm just like dancing and nodding and like doing all the things because I don't have anything else to say except like say it louder for the people in the back. Like I don't know what else to say except that, right? I think one of the things that pop up for me is that change is scary, right? Like for folks of like ways of being and ways of doing, like if this is how I've shown up And then you mean to tell me that actually, never mind, I'm changing and I have to change my whole belief system. I have to change, all of this. Like there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of anger that comes with that. And I think that's why a lot of the times, like the ed prep programs don't talk about these skills that we need to have as far as like, you know what, we need to think about our ways of being and our ways of doing. And I don't know. That was just so great. That was just so great, Sean. And when I was thinking about the ed prep programs, like when I went to UGA for my my bachelor's in middle school education, I just remember I felt like it was an over preparation. But then when I got into the classroom, it was actually like nothing that I learned actually like made any sense, because we would spend hours and hours and hours on one lesson plan when in reality, that's not the case at all. Like we don't have hours and hours and hours to do one lesson. Like, but that was like what they instilled in us. And I just think that was so ridiculous. Like, why? Anyway, so that was like my ed prep program. I mean, shout out, go dogs, I guess.
Okay. Question for you though.
Yeah.
During your ed prep program, what was your perspective, right? Like what was your lived experience going through your ed prep program? Because I feel very similar to you. I was like, what did I learn in my ed prep program? But actually I have to like reflect on myself, because I think I don't even know what I was hoping to learn. I just had a goal to being a teacher, right? I don't know what I was open to learning. I had an experience of being a student in schools, right? Not knowing what was on the backside of what a teacher was really working on or trying to achieve. I didn't know my teacher's goals. I just know the teacher got up there and gave me homework and then graded my homework, right?
I think like for me, it was definite because it was middle school English, right? And so we read a lot of YA books and middle grades books, and I absolutely love that. So it was so much fun, that part. I think it was also just like really frustrating because I got to be really creative with the things that I was coming up with as far as like, oh, this is what I want to teach. But in reality, like there were just so many boundaries and so many like limitations as to how much I could be creative, and like the autonomy, I didn't really have that. And so it was just kind of like a facade for me of like, wait, I had all the autonomy to be creative in my ed prep program, but then going into schools like public schools and public charter schools and independent schools, I'm like, oh, they do it this way and I can't do it actually the way that I had intended or wanted to. And it's actually really interesting too, because one of my professors, who I absolutely adored, one of the things that really stuck with me was, she was like, you're going to work with middle school kids. So I highly recommend that you exercise because they have a lot of energy and you need to be able to keep up with them. And that was like the one thing that stuck with me this entire time, is like, oh, I got to exercise. I have to exercise. I have to be able to keep up with them, and that's actually been super helpful. So I couldn't tell you like the theory or the pedagogy that I learned from this professor, but I could tell you, okay, you're right. Like I do. And then, should always say too, like, don't take anything personally. Middle schoolers are brutal. And I was like, okay, good to know. I got to have thick skin. Don't take anything personally. So I feel like those are life skills that I definitely needed to hear, or at least like advice anyway. So yeah. But yeah, the whole ways of being and ways of doing. Thank you so much for naming that. And I will put that in the show notes as well for folks who want to look into that. Definitely check out Bright Morning. They have great resources about this as well. And it really does take one teacher, right? And for me, I'm always talking about moving pebbles, and those pebbles will make huge changes, even though they're so tiny, right? Like the whole ripple effect, right? And something that I chuckle about all the time too is like with modern classrooms, our teachers do the marketing for us because they talk about it, right? They talk about it so well, so much, and they're so eager to share all the things that they're learning. And just the amount of times that I've heard that like, oh, this rejuvenated my teaching career. This made me want to stay for many more years because we have, the opportunity to really get to know our students, to really differentiate and personalize learning, and to really focus on the things that are important and then not focus on the things that are not important, right? And so I really like like that aspect of our model as well. Okay, so Sean, I'm gonna go off script for a little bit because we were talking about the Checklist Manifesto, which is a book that you recommended for me to read, and I did, but like I read like the Blinkist part of it, so it's kind of like the Cliff Notes summary version, or the top 3 things you should know. And it really stuck out to me because I love checklists, but the difference is that I actually do to-do lists and not checklists. And one of the things that they talk about in this book is really creating an intentional checklist where where everything, the procedure itself, you're talking about the procedure, right, is transparent so that folks, your teams can feel successful. They are not confused and they're not making mistakes that could have been prevented. And so with these checklists, to make it more transparent, because I think sometimes in education, we're not transparent and it like irks my soul.
If you're not transparent, people will write their own stories.
Right.
Right. And there is a lot of fiction that comes out of a lack of transparency, right? Which is never labeled fiction, right? And then it becomes all of a sudden fact, and you're like, what? So yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I was thinking, like, with this Checklist Manifesto, definitely check it out. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. It's just the fact that like everything is transparent, everything is clear. And then, the person who's creating this checklist makes sure that their team understands the purpose, they understand the procedure, they can practice it. And then in a way, like the checklist that they, embedded into like health practice, so like doctors were creating checklists, finance advisors were creating checklists for like their team to create just like a more collaborative and a more like nurturing, right? I feel like you have to be clear to create this space of support and collaboration, I think. But yeah, like, what are your thoughts on that? I know you were like, oh, I read that like 3 years ago. I can't believe you read it. But I was like, oh, perfect timing. I'm talking to Sean.
No, I'm so glad you read it. A little more context on that. So the author is Atul Gawande, I think is how you pronounce his name. He's also done at least one TED Talk that I watched recently, actually. He's a doctor, he's a surgeon. And basically there was just a lot of death happening at hospitals, surgical death that could have been prevented. And they realized that if they had set some procedures up in place and double checked to make sure that things were going well, that we could prevent these negative outcomes on the back end. So, all right. So my thought on this, okay, I have to go back to like education in the classroom and even evaluation. There are evaluation systems for administrators and classroom teachers, even our paraprofessionals. They make people feel so bad sometimes, right? Or they unintentionally cause our evaluators to, to unintentionally be not as truthful as they need to be, because I don't want to hurt my colleagues feeling they are doing good. Most of us are, I think, a scale of 1 to 4, right? And like essentially 3 means you're adequate. 4 means, yeah, like you're great, right? I mean, if I was going to really distill it down into just like some feelings, so I feel okay. I feel good about being a 3. I feel awesome about being a 4. But if I don't have enough 4s, if I only have 3s, and God forbid I have a 2, right? We have, then you have like this disruption, and you have like this perseveration on like these low areas, because evaluation happens, you get formal evaluation twice a year if you're on cycle, and then you're off cycle. It doesn't happen for every 3 years. So who is checking your procedure? Who's actually checking it? If I'm an administrator who oversees 50 staff members, that alone is a full-time job. How am I ever going to give them the feedback they need? Well, let me tell you, when you're a classroom teacher, or if you're an administrator with a staff, you've got that many people who can give you feedback on how you're doing, if things are set up transparently. So the Checklist Manifesto They even talk about, Wanda talks about airlines, right? They have flight check, right? Let's go down this checklist. They check off everything, because if they don't, if something happens and your plane crashes, right, that is a lot of people that are going to suffer because of that with life, right? So, in education, it's not that dire, right? We're not necessarily talking about life and death, but we are talking about how our students feel, or how they're currently feeling, or how they're receiving their education, how they're experiencing their education. And teachers they have feelings and perspectives about how they're coming into a space, or how they're being received into a space, how they're being received by their colleagues. And if there are some agreements on ways that we want to be in this space together, we can check with one another. And our team has leaned on this program it's a program out of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence called Ruler. Ruler is recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, understanding, labeling, expressing, and regulating emotions. There's multiple parts to that. But like the number one thing is like create this charter. It's essentially this agreement of how we want to feel in this space. It's not necessarily a checklist. It's kind of open-ended, right? It's like, okay, we agree we want to feel valued. We agree we want to feel connected, right? Those are a couple of basic agreements that come up quite often on some of the charters that I've seen. And you start with adults, right? And classrooms can do the same thing, but in this classroom, this is what we want to feel. Now we talk about the behaviors we want to, kind of like some basic behaviors we want to see. And then, there might be some others, but then when we see behaviors that aren't in agreement or in alignment with the ways we want to feel, we can check each other and have that conversation. And there's like this blueprint where it's like, okay, if something is off the rails, right, how do we check? So this checklist manifesto, and this is just like, that's about feelings. That's not even like operationally, but like when we talk about like the ways that we're being, like, are we living into the agreements we have with one another to be in this space? And then you can get very technical. I want to feel informed. Well, now we're talking about procedurally. And again, just kind of talking about my team, one of the things that was happening, we do a lot of professional development. I can't remember how many events we had this year, but it was like crazy. It was a crazy amount of events we have. And you have, we've got like 10 or 12, 13 people producing these events. They all funnel through our 2 awesome senior clerical specialists. And, from booking a room to booking food if we need to, and catering, to ensuring that communication is good, to set up and all of these things. Well, things aren't transparent enough, then there's disruption and there's confusion and there's lack of information. I don't know what's happening. And we had to create a system wherein everybody knew what was happening, the flow was clean, and we're still working on the system, but it's getting better and better because we're constantly accepting feedback. And then we review afterwards, and it's short cycle phases of improvement. If that is not built in, the system of care, the system of checking procedures, this open mindset to receiving feedback if things are not working or for not producing the results we want. And if the mindset is like that blame mindset of like, well, you didn't, well, I did mine, so I'm good, but you didn't do yours. Like this collegial approach to finding ways to do better. I think evaluation ends up taking care of itself, because you can identify people who are basically, unwilling to change, or maybe don't have the skills or the capacity to do the things they need to do in the role they're in. So let's find them a role that fits better. But it becomes very, very clear to everybody where folks are strong, or where the system is working, or where it's not working. And then we can really look at the system together and know our part in that system. So your checklist manifesto, I mean, this is like a long way around it, but it's like, there are different things that need to happen, and we constantly need to be checking, but we also need to be open to feedback for what is working. Open feedback, not not didactic, not yes, this worked, no, this didn't work. Like, hey, what worked for you? What didn't work for you? Tell me, what are your ideas to make this even better? And then incorporate those things as we can, as we should, or as we need to.
Honestly, Sean, like that was pure magic how you connected it with assessments and evaluations, or just rather evaluations. And I was like, yeah, that makes so much sense, right? Like if the checklist is the evaluation, right? Making it transparent, making it something that, our educators can understand the whole process for it, then it's a much better way to create the space of whatever it is that our expectations are, right? And then it got me thinking about students, because again, I'm always thinking about our students. Right? When we think about mastery-based learning or proficiency-based or standards-based, right? We want to have a clear rubric, right? Like a clear quote unquote checklist also of like, what can you do to reach mastery? Like what are some options, or what are some ways that you can reach mastery? And I always tell teachers this too, is like, if you have a mastery check, you have to do it yourself. So you know exactly what you want, what you want to see. Like, how do you think our students are going to answer this mastery check? How long did it take you, right? What are some misconceptions that may show up in this question that you had asked? Or maybe what is this question restricting or limiting our students, right? And so it's just really interesting that like, when you have a mastery check or any kind of assessment, honestly, you want to have a really clear and transparent way of showing and sharing like, oh, this is how you quote unquote reach mastery, right? Or like, this is how you can show that you really understand the concept that we're teaching you. And so, yeah, my mind is just kind of going everywhere. And I really, again, appreciate, my neurodivergent brain is just like, oh my gosh, I can talk about this. I can talk about that.
I was just thinking that. Should we get back to the script? Maybe, I don't know.
No, it's great because again, it's just a reminder to how important feedback is, right? And being receptive, and how change is inevitable. Something that worked for you the last year may not work for you the next year, or something that worked for you last week may not work next week.
Yeah.
And so just being open to iterations, being open to change. And there's always room for improvement. There's actually not an end goal. Like we just don't say like, oh, here we are, and then think that that's where we're going to stay. We get stagnant, and that's not what we want. That's not how we grow. That's not how we get our students to grow. That's not how we get our community and our teammates to grow as well. So again, thank you for those. Thank you just for those reminders. Like, duh, like I needed to hear that. Let's think about, okay, I'm really curious, like, what do you hope to see in the future? What goals do you have? Can be personal or professional, really up to you.
I guess I really hope. I mean, my youngest daughter, she's going into the second grade. And I hope that by the time she's in high school, things are a little bit more clear for her in terms of grading practices, in terms of her locus of control, in terms of helping her to not feel like she's being funneled into a college route or a CTE route. I would love to have kids understand that every step of the process keeps them open, so that post-secondary, I have a plethora of options. I could go this way or that way or the other way. I would love to see that play out a little bit more. I know a couple of counselors who are just phenomenal people. They serve students so well. And still, I hear you are a college track type of a student. You are a CTE type of track student, and that, I don't know their perspective. They're saying that with, respect to the student, with respect to what they know about the student, with respect to what they know about the process, which is deeper than mine. But it still causes me to just, panic just a little bit. Like, are we just funneling that student? Why are we saying that that's the type of person you are? I was going to join the military. I was right out of high school. I was like 100%. I was going to join the military. It wasn't even a question on my mind. I was like, yeah, not really that. I was like a 3.5, 3.6 GPA in high school. And I did not challenge myself. I didn't take any advanced classes. I probably was not the most academically honest student at times. I'm not proud of that, but I made it through. I think, charisma probably helped with that. Confidence, my upbringing, I probably didn't recognize my privilege that I had. And I was going to join the military, and then my high school pitching coach, I just remember it was like a summer. It was summer. We were already playing summer ball, so it was like late June or something. And he said, "Hey, you should go pitch. You could go pitch down at the community college." He's like, "You could easily go pitch over there." I mean, had he not said that, I doubt that I would have become an educator. It's very likely I probably would have been a career military person, because I just kind of get into something and I just keep going in that direction. I get passionate about whatever it is I'm doing. And, that changed my trajectory. And, I was military because I didn't have a lot of interaction with my counselor. It seemed like a good thing to do. So that would have been my route. Had I had more conversation and known like, hey, these are my options, I might have looked at, okay, what would it take to do this or that or the other? And I hadn't done that. And so I hope that my daughter, 7 years from now, whatever, and she goes into high school, I hope that she can have a little bit of a picture painted of like, okay, if you choose this doorway, these are the doorways it will open up. And if you choose this doorway, these are the doorways it will open up. And she'll see, oh, I can choose door number 1, door number 2, door number 3, and look at the intersection of the doors beyond door number 1, door number 2, door number 3. There is intersection within those. And so I hope that can be clearly articulated to her and to more students as we go into the future.
That resonates a lot with me, Sean. Thank you for sharing that. And I wrote on my notes, with the counselors, I was definitely labeled college track, right? Like that was, what college are you going to go to? What do you need to get into college? This is what you need. This is these are the skill sets. These are the classes. Like it was always very much college. And for me, that was just such a limiting narrative. Like you said, I didn't know my other options. I didn't know there were other options. Instead, I got into student loan debt, right? Because I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to college. And like my parents couldn't afford it. So I just took out all the loans. And so it's like, it's a very limiting narrative. And I really do love this whole concept of like paint a picture here, all of your options. And I would also add on to your future goals. For me anyway, like, here are all the options, and not one is better than the other. They just are options, right? Because sometimes we tend to think as a society, oh, if you go to college, it's so much better. And I've been doing a lot of self-reflection lately, and it's like I miss being in the classroom. I think I've said that over and over and over again. And I love learning, and I love expanding my brain. And Avery and I were talking actually, and I was like, you know what? I'm getting in this space in my life where I'm like, I could probably get my doctorate. And then I started chuckling and I said, actually, Avery, instead of getting a doctorate, I'm going to go to trade school and get my plumbing license. I want to learn how to be a plumber, because academia has always been easy for me. That's not going to really expand my brain, right? Like I want something that's going to challenge me. And I feel like trade school, like we just don't talk enough about trade school. We don't talk enough about CTE. We don't talk about, the other options that's not college. And so I'm like, can you imagine just like me being a plumber, getting my hands dirty? Like that makes me feel really uncomfortable, but I feel like it'd be so exciting than me getting a doctorate. But you know what? That's the stage of my life right now. But thank you for bringing up all of these emotions. As you were talking about your hopes for your daughter, I also hope that for your daughter, because I feel like for your daughter and all of the all the kids out here just experiencing schools right now. And so, Sean, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your expertise. I appreciate your patience as well. How can our listeners connect with you?
Well, you mentioned actually, running a lot. And if anybody, I suppose, wanted to follow me on Strava, I'll have to get you that link because you mentioned that. Strava is like social network for, athletic things, right? So you can do all kinds. Anyway, if people know Strava, they're on there. They can get on. I'll follow it. I'll send it to you. I really don't do a whole lot of social media except LinkedIn. So I've got a LinkedIn profile, and folks can follow me there. I'll post occasionally things connected to what I'm passionate about. Oftentimes about my family, because that's the whole reason I do anything. Is like I want to make sure that they have the life that they need. And those are probably the two best ways to get a hold of me. My email, folks can have my email. We can drop that in the chat. So they can reach out that way. But I'm happy to chat about the things we spoke about today. These topics are they're so important. Originally we talked about the system alignment, and every system's different, right? And just understanding why we do the thing you mentioned, I'm told to do something, and it's like, yeah, we're all told to do things. How can we do them? Why? What's the purpose behind these things we do? How is it going to help me be the best that I can be, or serve those that I need to serve really well? And just being open to those conversations. I'm happy to have any of those kinds of conversations, because sometimes they're really tough and you just need somebody who's very neutral.
Yes, I love that. So definitely reach out, listeners. This is definitely the first time, Sean, that we've had someone say, reach out to me or be friends on Strava. I love it. I actually don't have Strava, but I feel like I should as a runner, because every runner I know is like Strava. But good to know. So we'll definitely put that in the show notes. So thank you.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I don't even have that. Some of my friends on Strava, I don't even have that many friends on Strava. Just the people I know. I don't friend a lot of people. I'm just kind of anyway. Yeah,
totally understandable. Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and expertise, Sean. I absolutely love spending time with you anytime I get a chance. So just thank you.
Yeah, you're awesome.
We could just continue to appreciate each other, honestly.
Yeah.
Okay, well, listeners, remember, you can always email us at podcast@modernclassrooms.org, and you can find the show notes for this episode at podcast.modernclassrooms.org/202. We'll have this episode's transcript uploaded by Friday, so be sure to check back to access those. Also, we are asking our listeners to leave a review if this podcast has been helpful in supporting you to create a human-centered learning environment through a blended, self-paced, and mastery-based model. It does help other folks find it. Thank you all for listening. Have a great week, and we'll be back next Sunday.
Thank you so much for listening. You can find links to topics and tools we discussed in our show notes for this episode. And remember, you can learn more about our work at www.modernclassrooms.org, and you can learn the essentials of our model through our free course at learn.modernclassrooms.org. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at modernclassproj, that's Proj. We are so appreciative of all you do for students and schools. Have a great week, and we'll be back next Sunday with another episode of the Modern Classrooms Project podcast.